A Merchant's Tale. Annie wiped blood from her nose. She trembled in every limb, as he loomed over her in all his tyrannical authority. The fire crackled angrily a few inches from her face. She had stumbled towards it after being struck, and had almost toppled into the flames.
"Useless wench,"
he growled.
"even more so than before. The money from our father's dowry is all but spent, and now the rest of it is gone as well."
Gone in a puff of smoke. Its magnificence crumbled into ash and rubble. The money had been used to fuel his drinking habit, and now the £2,000 house had burnt to the ground. No one knew how the fire had started, but it was rumoured to have been started deliberately, and the 300 barrels of fine wine and ale in the cellars had evaporated in the searing heat. Annie had been married to the clergyman for 20 hellish years. The manse where they had lived all that time was as bleak as the little village church where he preached every Sunday. To the villagers he was a pious and charitable man. To Annie he was her brutal jailer. She couldn't watch him preach, couldn't watch him standing up there in his white surplice, his long bony fingers curving over the edge of the pulpit. She knew too well what those fingers were capable of, especially when he clenched them into a fist. His face was elongated and grim, his eyes sunken into their sockets. He left her now, and a few moments later she heard the door bang shut. He would be off to the Sheep's Head Inn to drown his anger. Clinging to the side of the stone mantelpiece, she managed to stand up. She edged her way along the side of the panelled wall, caressing the wood with her fingers as she went. Her fingers suddenly stopped at one of the panels. She pressed on it, and it opened into a small, hidden recess. She reached inside and removed a little framed cameo. She put it to her lips and kissed it. "I still love you, although you abandoned me to this fate. We could have been happy together." Tears rolled from her eyes. Chapter 1. The carriage stood outside the entrance to Mary King's Close, the horses stamping their hooves on the cobbles, great billows of steam pouring out of their nostrils in the cold air. It was 3 o'clock on Monday the 18th of November, 1649. The Lord Provost of Edinburgh emerged from a turnpike stair-tower, carrying in his arms a very sick boy, the eldest son of his good friend William Lloyd, one of the most successful wine merchants in Edinburgh. He had been given the title of Bailey 4 years ago. No sooner had he got the boy into the carriage than Lloyd emerged onto the street with a woman in his arms. She was bundled up in a quilt to keep her warm, and her head was against his shoulder, her eyes closed, her skin pale. The provost helped him put her in the carriage, laying her down on one of the seats. Her 2 children were on the seat opposite. All 3 were suffering from tuberculosis. Still to be brought down from upstairs was the infant. Lloyd now ran back to get her. "Put her with her mother," said Lloyd. "Perhaps it would be best if I told her. Just do it, David." The provost placed the child in the woman's arms. Lloyd calmed in. "Catherine, it's William. Can you hear me?" She moaned. "Where are we going?" "We're going to the nunnery of the Sisters of St. Flotton. David's sister is the Mother Superior there. She has secured 3 extra beds in the infirmary, which is already full. You will be well taken care of there." Catherine began to get distressed. "No, I'm going to die. We're going to lose the baby." "Don't talk like that. Don't distress yourself. You have to preserve your energy." The provost got in. The driver cracked his whip, and the carriage started to move. "How long do you think it'll take to get there?" asked Lloyd. 20 minutes, no more than that." Lloyd nodded. They both had a child on their laps. The carriage rattled over the cobbles. It headed towards the West Bow, passing through the bustling lawn market and out towards the West Port. It had started to rain, the drops splattering against the windows. They left the city and headed out along the dirt road towards the nunnery. "Once again, thank you for this, David. Don't mention it. I am only sorry I can't do anything more, but May will see that they are well looked after." Lloyd sighed. "I told her not to go down into the close. The risk was too great. She thought she could make a difference, William. This current outbreak means a lot of people are needing care and attention. Lloyd gazed at his wife's reclining figure, and not for the first time he felt angered towards her. She had brought the disease back and infected her children. He clutched his eldest son, Bobby, to his chest and prayed. He looked out through the rain-streaked window at the fields rushing past them. Suddenly there was a massive shudder and the sound of splintering wood, and a moment later the carriage came to a grinding halt. Catherine was knocked off the seat onto the floor, still clutching the infant. The horses whinnied loudly. "Dear God!" shouted Lloyd, frantically passing Bobby over to the Provost. He managed to get his wife off the floor and back onto the seat. "I've thrown a wheel!" shouted the driver. "Oh no," exclaimed the Provost. "That's not good." He opened the door and jumped out to inspect the damage. It was immediately apparent that it was not going to be a quick fix. They were a mile from the nunnery, and it was raining hard now, coming down in sheets. "If they get wet in this, they won't make it," said the Provost to himself. He shouted to the driver, "We need help! Can you detach one of the horses?" The driver jumped down and began trying to do what the Provost had suggested, but the horses were both in a state, rearing and whinnying. "They're out of control, bloody animals! Control them then!" shouted the Provost angrily. The driver started lashing them with a whip, but it had absolutely no effect. The Provost got back into the carriage. "We're in trouble. The horses are wild." "Can he not go on foot?" Just then there was the sound of thundering hooves and another shrill whinny. The Provost peered out the window. "It's Joe!" Joe leapt down from his horse and opened the door. "What are you doing here?" asked Lloyd. "I decided to follow. Need any help?" 15 minutes later, Joe returned with another carriage and driver. It was just in time. Bobby had begun to tremble and vomit. They transferred the passengers and carried on their journey, leaving their first driver struggling with his horses. 10 minutes later they saw the dark nunnery loom up out of the mist. They pulled up at the main gates. The driver called out, and the gates opened slowly inwards. They rolled into the cobbled yard. The Mother Superior was waiting for them on the large front steps. The Provost jumped out. "Mary! David, the beds are all ready. The sooner we can get those people in, the better." The two nuns appeared with a stretcher. Catherine and the child were placed upon it, while the two other children were carried. They took them through a series of long, echoing corridors, lit by flickering candlelight, until they reached the infirmary. It thronged with the sounds of coughing and crying. Two enormous fires burned at either end. "Remember what I told you, David. We will do what we can for these people, but we are stretched to the limit as it is." The Provost sighed. "Just do what you can, Mary. These are my godchildren. I have a responsibility towards them." Mary looked at him steadily. "Is it really that? Or is this about Morag?" She said it quietly, gently, but it was not a gentle question. David seemed to stiffen. "The past is the past," she said, laying her hand on her brother's arm. "It was not your fault. You do not have to try and make amends." "Just do what you can," he said again. Chapter 2. Joe rode back to the city with Lloyd on the saddle behind him. Joe was Lloyd's employee. He was a town guard and patrolled Lloyd's bailiwick for him. Bailies were distinguished members of the community who were given the position of law enforcer because they were both trusted and respected. They gave orders to the town guards and had many contacts and informants working for them. Joe had worked with Lloyd for 3 years now, and during that time had become very close to him and his family. Lloyd had remained in the city during the outbreak of the Great Plague. He had never spoken of that period to Joe, and Joe never pressed him for details. It was clearly something he wanted to forget. He now returned him to his tenement building. He had to help Lloyd up the stairs, as the man was on the point of collapse. Once inside, he laid him down on the living room settle and suggested he got some rest. Joe was still there 2 hours later when he woke up. He put together some food, and they sat down at the dining room table to eat. Lloyd didn't speak. He still looked like he was in shock. He had one other child, Elizabeth, who was 18. She was visiting friends up north at the moment, but would be back tomorrow. What a nightmare to come home to. At 7:30, Joe announced that he was going to start his patrols. "I'll come back later on and see how you are." "Let me walk with you," said Lloyd, standing up. "Are you sure?" asked Joe. "Yes," he said, nodding. "I need the air." They walked out onto the high street. The rain had stopped now, and the darkness was complete. The lamplighters were out, trying to bring illumination to the closes. Lloyd shivered and pulled his cloak about him. I hate this cold weather. It is so depressing. I know. But when I was a soldier, we could be camped out in colder weather than this. Some of the men got frostbite in their fingers and toes. I didn't need to know that, Joe. Sorry. But when you do patrols, you learn how to keep warm. They began walking down to the Tron. I used to go for walks with Catherine. Don't, interrupted Joe. Don't think about it. There's no point. Why? She's my wife. The woman I love more than anyone else in this world, and she's going to be leaving it soon. You don't know that, William. She's in good hands. They all are. Lloyd nodded. I know. But I am a man of little hope, Joe. And why is that? For a man who has had so much success in his life. Perhaps because I am afraid it will all disappear, crumble into nothing. I cling on to the present, and with the little hope that I do possess, hope that what I do now will secure a healthy future. Is that why you were so eager to get Elizabeth married off to a man of great wealth? Lloyd nodded. Her future is more important to me than my own. It is my job to secure it for her. Joe was silent a moment before saying, and what if she does not want the future that you want for her? She will accept any future that I propose. That is her duty. What if she does not love him? When it comes to aristocracy, that is largely irrelevant. Women must marry for convenience and obedience. That is Elizabeth's duty, as I said, and she knows it. She trusts me, though. Trusts that I will not marry her off to someone I do not feel is appropriate for her. But I think we have talked enough on this subject, Joe. Yes, sir, replied Joe. As they passed the Pearsons' close, a figure suddenly stepped out of the shadows and came towards them. Lloyd! It was Campbell, another Bailey. And it was not who Lloyd wanted to see right now, nor any other time for that matter. Good evening, Campbell. I was coming to find you. There is a problem at your storeroom. Lloyd's heart sank even lower. What's been stolen? It's not that. About 20 minutes ago, one of my guards discovered blood seeping out from underneath the door. Lloyd stared at him. What? Campbell nodded. Could you come with me? At once, replied Lloyd. He followed Campbell down into Pearson's close. 3 of his town guards were keeping watch. Joe came behind them. The bowered lamp opposite the storeroom door reflected in the pool of congealing blood. Lloyd reached into his pouch for the key, and with a trembling hand fitted it into the lock and turned it. He pushed open the door. One of the town guards shoved his lantern inside. Lloyd took one look at the bloodied corpse that seemed to sit propped against the barrels, its head bowed over its chest, and almost threw up. Joe grabbed him before he collapsed. "Dear God in heaven!" he exclaimed. Campbell stepped inside. There was blood everywhere. It covered the floor, and on the wall was what looked like arterial spray. He stepped carefully towards the body and gently raised the head. It was then that Lloyd did throw up, not because of his jagged tear in the corpse's throat, nor because of the dead eyes that seemed to have rolled up into its head, but because the face was that of his apprentice, Michael Ashcroft. "Do you know him?" asked Campbell. Lloyd nodded and explained. "All right," said Campbell. "Move the body to the Tolbooth cellars for now. Lloyd, see if anything is missing from here." As the town guards began to remove the body, Lloyd moved forward, as if in a dream, into the room. After about 5 minutes he returned. "Nothing," he said quietly. "Everything is as it was." Campbell nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. He didn't quite manage to look Lloyd straight in the eyes as he said this. "When did you last see Ashcroft alive?" "Yesterday afternoon." "Are you the only one with a key to this place?" "Yes." "Where do you usually keep that key?" "On my person when I'm out, and when I'm at home it's in a locked box. There is no way anybody could have got access to that key?" "I don't see how." Campbell nodded. He paused. "I'm sorry to ask you this, but where have you—" "He's been with me for the past few hours," replied Joe. "So if you're suggesting—" "I'm not," interrupted Campbell. "I'm just doing my job." Lloyd now looked at him. "And I hope you do it as the professional I know you can be." Campbell didn't answer. He just shifted his feet slightly. "Put our differences behind us and find this bastard for me. I'll do my best." Lloyd shook his head. "I don't know what's going on at the moment. I can hardly think straight. The gods seem to be against me today.
First my family, and now this. Who am I going to lose next?
Your family? Asked Campbell, frowning. They have all been struck down with tuberculosis. All save one, my eldest daughter. Campbell stared at him. I am very sorry, he said quietly, and stepped back out into the close. The town guards followed him. Joe made to leave as well, but Lloyd caught his arm. Hold on. He took him to one side, keeping his voice low. My ceremonial dagger is missing. Joe frowned. The one the provost gave you? Lloyd nodded. You think someone used it to do this? It's a strong possibility. That doesn't make any sense. Actually, it makes perfect sense. If you look at the evidence, it's crystal clear. No one could have got easy access to my storeroom tonight. This was not a robbery gone wrong. Nothing is missing. This was planned. And if it was planned, the killer would have brought his own knife. Why use mine? You think someone's trying to frame you? Most certainly. But who? Oh, I'm a Bailey. It could be any number of people I've arrested over the years. But if it's to frame you, that knife will turn up somewhere. Who knew I had it? And who knew I kept it here? A ceremonial dagger should be in the house. I only removed it because of the children. Half an hour later, Lloyd knocked at the provost's door. The servant showed him through to the living room, where the provost greeted him in his silk nightgown. My apologies. I thought I would get an early night. How are you feeling? Lloyd took a breath. David, my apprentice Michael Ashcroft has been murdered. Oh no. When? About an hour ago. He was found locked in my storeroom. That's Campbell's territory. I know, he sighed. You could do with a drink. He ordered a quaich of whisky from the servant. When it came, they drank a toast. To Ashcroft, said the provost, and to your family. They took it in turns to drink. Lloyd sat down heavily in a lang settle. What have I done, David? What am I being punished for? What sins from my past are catching up with me? The provost sat down next to him. Only you have the answer to that, William. Lloyd closed his eyes. He sat in contemplative silence for a good 10 minutes. Give me this case, David. What? You heard me. Let me investigate this with Joe. I need this. I need something to focus my mind on. Because if it's not focused on something, I will go crazy. The provost sighed. It's Campbell's case. He was my apprentice. The two men looked at each other steadily. Again the provost sighed. Suppose I were to let you. You would need a good lead, a good reason to go after someone, because I will not have you chasing after shadows that turn into nothing. Do you understand? Lloyd nodded. Do you have a theory? Asked the provost. William shook his head. Then let Campbell investigate the case just now. If you come up with something strong, let me know. Fair enough. But I worry that Campbell will not put as much effort into this case as usual. Campbell is a professional. He's also corrupt. Perhaps, but to be fair, we don't have much proof of that. Yes, he bribed the colonel, but that's the only evidence we have on him. He should have been dismissed for that. I agree. The news spreads fast in this city, and we want the public to have confidence in the Baileys. If they knew corruption was rife, they do know it, David. There's just not much they can do about it. And anyway, the town guards are more corrupt than the Baileys. That is true. Lloyd took another sip of whiskey. All right. I'll do some thinking. But in the meantime, if you could press Campbell for updates on this case, I would much appreciate that. I will, he paused. Were you planning on sleeping at home tonight? I don't know. I would rather not. I don't feel like going back there yet, although I will have to pick up my pistol at some point. Stay here, William. I'll have the guest bedchamber prepared. Lloyd nodded. Thank you. Lloyd did not mention the ceremonial dagger to his friend. Chapter 3. Campbell entered Mary King's Close. His footsteps echoed around the buildings that towered on either side of him. The bowered lamps flickered madly, and a strong, pungent breeze was blowing up from the loch towards him. It was 9:30. When he was halfway down, he started climbing a wooden turnpike stair towards a 10th-story house. This was the one thing he dreaded doing. These stairs were rickety and badly built, and were notoriously dangerous. The higher he went, the more his palms began to sweat. The steps creaked. The rainwater had made the wood slippery. Up and up and up. He couldn't look down now. If he did, he would panic. He had fallen from a turnpike stair when he was a boy. He looked up. He was coming to the top. Raindrops spattered his face. Finally he reached the top. A sudden strong gust of wind blew him off balance. His heart sprang into his throat, and instinctively he clutched at the rail to his right. The rail was rotten, and the nail that held it to the rest of the stairs now come away. The rail, with his hand still attached, swung out into mid-air. For a horrible second he saw his life flash before him, but at that moment his knees buckled, and he fell back against the door. The door opened, and he tumbled inside. Henderson looked down at him. "You're late." "I'm very sorry," said Campbell, catching his breath. "And before we go any further, is it possible we could find somewhere else to meet, preferably closer to the ground?" "What's the matter with you, Campbell?" "I have a problem with heights, as it happens." Henderson closed the door behind him. "Your rail at the top there is broken. I just about fell to my death." "Sorry about that. Whiskey?" "Definitely." Henderson walked over to a table on the other side of the room. On it were a selection of bottles. On the wall just above them hung a sketch of a woman. He poured Campbell a drink. "He's not going to pay us the price we want. He says it's not worth it to him. You wouldn't be able to sell the reels on for that much." "Well, how much is he offering?" 200, not a penny more. That's for the whole 5 reels of silk plus the handle sticks." Campbell cursed viciously. "You're going to have to find a new buyer." "How do you suggest to do that?" "By using your contacts, you fool. Argyle's not going to be happy. He'll put up a fight. We'll have to pay him off. It'll be more trouble than it's worth. James, if we can't be guaranteed to get a high price for these goods, then we are out of business. So I would say it's a good gamble." Henderson gave him his whiskey. "All right." He laughed suddenly. "I always wondered why a man of class such as yourself turned to a life of crime." "I grew up with it." Campbell drained his glass. "Give me another." Henderson took the glass from him again. "But your brother became a lawyer, worlds apart, wouldn't you say?" Campbell nodded. "Yes," he replied quietly, "and he never forgave me for it." "And your father? What did he do?" "He owned a stagecoach company, the biggest one on the East Coast. In 1 year we sent 400 of our coaches as far as London and back." Henderson frowned. "But that sounds like an honest job. I thought you said you grew up with crime." He fiddled the books. "I would know. I helped him do it. We secretly put hundreds of pounds to one side each month." Henderson laughed. "Anything exciting going on out there tonight?" "Only murder. Not what I would call exciting. William Lloyd's apprentice had his throat cut. We found him in his storeroom. As much as I hate Lloyd, I can't help feeling sorry for him." "Found in his storeroom, you say?" "Yes, with the door locked." "Well, that doesn't look very good for Lloyd, does it?" "Lloyd's not a killer. Besides, he was with his colleague Joe most of the day." "And do you know that for sure?" "No, but I do know that if I couldn't kill anybody, Lloyd certainly couldn't." "What is it you don't like about him?" asked Henderson, handing him more whiskey. "When I first met him, he struck me as somebody who'd do no wrong, a man firmly on the right side of the law. I didn't like him for that. There was no corruption in him. But a few years ago a position for a security advisor came up at the castle, something I wanted very much. We both applied, but in our own ways. I was damned if I was going to let Lloyd get the job over me, so I bribed Colonel Stewart to give me the job. I had heard he was corruptible. I heard wrong. He exposed me, and then automatically gave the job to Lloyd. The provost was so furious with me. He said I was close to being dismissed. He threw me in the iron room in the Tollbooth for 2 months. My sympathies. I've been there before. But how do you know you couldn't kill anybody? Would you not kill someone if they threatened to expose our little business? Under no circumstances, snapped Campbell. I may be corrupt, but there are certain things I will not do. Campbell took a slow sip of whiskey. My brother was murdered 6 years ago, so I know what it's like to lose someone in that way. What happened to your brother? Asked Henderson. Somebody entered his bedchamber in the middle of the night and shot him 3 times in the chest. He'd managed to get a shot off himself before he was killed. There was blood on the wall next to the door. They never found who did it. Henderson was silent a moment. And if you found him before the authorities did, would you still stay your hand? Campbell stared into his glass. No. He drank it back. No, Henderson, if I found the man who shot my brother, I would not hesitate. Not for a moment. Well, there you are, then. As the Bible says, an eye for an eye. I should go. At the door he turned. You've got 2 days to find another buyer for those goods. We need to get rid of them soon. Good night. Safe descent, said Henderson, as the door closed. He listened to Campbell's feet walking away down the stairs, slow and faltering. Then he turned and went back to the table with the bottles. He took the bottle of whiskey. He took the little portrait off the wall, and he went over to the fire. He sat down cross-legged on the hearth. He took a long swig from the bottle, and he stared at the charcoal image. He knew that face so well, and he missed it so much. A lump began to form in his throat. Alison. Alison. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stop you that night. But you wouldn't have listened to me anyway. And you got an idea in your head. You didn't change your mind. You would do anything for a friend. You would do anything for me. Even if that meant risking your life. It's why I married you. You were the goodness that I was lacking. You represented the part of my soul that was missing. The lighter side. The side that cared. It's all gone now. When you died, I died. The light went out. I will never forget you. I will never forget the gift that you gave me. The gift of a new life. Thank you for loving me, Alison. Thank you for seeing me. I am grateful for the time I had with you. Henderson took another long swig of whiskey. He took you from me. He took the only thing I ever cared about. Tears welled up in his eyes, and I will have my vengeance for that. If it's the only thing I live for now, I promise you that man will die. And he will die knowing the pain you went through before he takes his own last breath. His eyes shifted to the fire. Oh, I am coming for you, Lloyd. Chapter 4. Lloyd unlocked the door to his apartment and walked in over the threshold. His foot scuffed something on the floor. An envelope with his name scrawled on front of it was lying in the hall. It must have been pushed under the door. He picked it up and put it in his pocket, intending to read it later that evening. He'd come back to retrieve his pistol. It was kept in a carved wooden box under the lock and key. He entered the bedchamber. For a few moments he stood silently just inside the doorway. The bed linen was still crumpled, the covers thrown back. He looked to the hanging on the wall, the tapestry that Catherine had made. He looked over towards the chest where her clothes were kept, and he began to shake. A huge surge of emotion flowed through him. He choked back tears, but he couldn't hold them. He slumped down onto the floor, his back against the wall. He drew his knees up to his chest and wept. For half an hour he stayed there, thinking about Catherine and the children, thinking about what he had potentially lost. He thought too about Elizabeth returning tomorrow, and how he would have to break the news to her. She was gold dust now, something so rare it would have to be protected. Eventually he rose, retrieved his pistol, shoved it into his pelt, put a handful of pellets into his pouch, and left the apartment without looking back. He crossed the high street towards Fishmarket Close. A lamplighter was doing his rounds. He nodded to him. "A good evening, sir?" "No," replied Lloyd. "Not a good evening at all." And he walked on. If he had looked back, he would have seen that the lamplighter was still watching him. Henderson enjoyed his job. It gave him a certain sense of peace. Darkness suited him. It was a comforting cloak for his work, but also for his soul. It protected him, shielded him from the stares of others who saw him as nothing more than a rat that needed to be eradicated. But the job also gave him a reason to be out at night. None of the town guards stopped him. In fact, they knew him and were quite friendly to him. As a lamplighter, he could scout for Campbell. He knew where the rich people lived. He knew what times they came and went when their houses would be unoccupied. This information he would pass on to Campbell, who would then turn up at their house on some pretext concerning his job as bailey. This allowed him to see what riches the house possessed, and they would take it from there. Henderson did the thieving. Campbell had arrested Henderson 2 years ago for theft, but instead of dragging him off to the toll booth, he had taken him somewhere quiet where they could talk in private. Campbell had made a deal with him, start a partnership with him or go to jail. It wasn't a tough decision to make for Henderson, who also became one of Campbell's many informants. He now began to follow Lloyd, keeping in the shadows. He had hoped the evidence of the locked door would have been enough to convict him immediately, but evidently not. No matter. He was not defeated yet. He still had his backup plan to put into action, and if that didn't work, then there was the other plan as well. He was not going to take any precautions, and he would not stop until Lloyd lay stinking in the ground. He followed him all the way to the Provost house. So that's where we are staying tonight. Sweet dreams, Lloyd, muttered Henderson. Chapter 5. 3.5 years earlier. The door opened and a rush of cold air and rain blew into the room. After it came Alison, wrapped in a cloak, a shawl around her head. She seemed out of breath. "Borthwick's close has been cordoned off. They say they're all sick in there." Henderson didn't move. "James, there's nothing we can do for them. Richard and Margaret are our friends. They'll be looked after. But that's all there is to it, Alison." Henderson sat down. So that's it? You're not prepared? Prepared to do what?" he shouted, jumping up. "What do you think I can do that will make any difference in this situation? We're in the middle of the worst plague that has ever struck Edinburgh, and you think I can save our friends? There are people out there trying to do just that." Alison lowered her head. For a moment they stood in silence, listening to the howling elements outside. Eventually he approached her. "I'm sorry for shouting," he said. "These rules are for our own protection. They're necessary for stopping the worst spread of the more disease. I know that. But you don't understand. What do you mean?" She turned away from him. "Never mind." "What are you talking about?" asked Henderson, frowning. She didn't answer. "Talk to me, Alison. I don't like there being secrets between us. I thought we shared everything. I thought we could trust each other." Again she said nothing. Henderson sat on the bed again. "You've changed. These past few months you've been different. I know you've been going out at night. I've tried to pretend that it isn't happening, but I'm not going to print any more, Alison." He looked up at her. "How many men have you slept with?" She spun round. "How dare you? Don't! Just don't! Tell me the truth!" For a moment she stared at him in desperation. Then she ran forward and knelt down in front of him. "Oh, James, She lowered her head again. She couldn't look at him. "I had to. You said it yourself, we have no money to live on. I was doing it for us, for you. I know how that sounds, believe me." "And Richard?" She didn't immediately reply. "Jesus, you slept with him. Why? In God's name, why? I don't know. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't. You are my life, James. There is nothing in this world I care about more." She stroked his cheek affectionately. "I am nothing without you." Henderson's chest heaved. He leaned forward and kissed her. "And I am nothing without you," he sobbed. Chapter 6. The carriage drew up outside the tenement, above the entrance to Mary King's Close. A young woman jumped out, an abundance of dark hair, rich clothes, and a beaming smile. Elizabeth had arrived home. "Father!" she cried, flinging her arms around him. "Oh, you wouldn't believe what it's like up there. The sunsets, the heather, the horse riding. We even stalk deer. Oh, you must let me go again soon, and you should come with me. Fanny says she's dying to meet you." The girl's utterances were almost all in one excited breath, but her father wasn't reacting the way she had expected. Elizabeth's smile faded. "Father, what's wrong? Aren't you so pleased to see me?" "Elizabeth, I have some bad news. Perhaps you should come inside. Elizabeth's face was stony as she listened to what her father had to tell her. She sat rigid in a chair, her back straight as a poplar. Her right hand, which was resting in her lap, trembled ever so slightly. "Tuberculosis," she whispered. "I am afraid so." She nodded. "Do you understand the seriousness of this?" "I do, Father." She didn't look at him, though. She stared straight ahead of her. "And do you understand what I want of you? What I want for you?" Again she nodded. "Say it, Elizabeth." "I must marry Walter. I must bear his children, for that is most likely the only way this family will continue." "Good girl." He sighed. "Please understand that I am doing this for your sake as well." She looked at him now. "You are cold, Father," she said. "Mother is dying. My siblings are dying, and all you can think about is marriage and children. Elizabeth, no. You have always been like this, so proper, so correct. Business comes before happiness for you. It comes before family. That is not true, but it is. For months now you have been looking for somebody for me. You have been engrossed in that search. Just like for all of my childhood, you were engrossed in work, but never in me." Lloyd looked down at his shiny black shoes, his silk stockings and his tailored doublet. It was all for performance, and suddenly he felt ashamed. "I understand my duties, Father, and I will carry them out, like the dutiful child I am, that I have always been. But know this, my heart is not truly in it. I do not know where my heart is. I do not know what it wants. I find myself confused, struggling between high society and freedom. Do you know what freedom is, Father? It's being allowed to make your own choices and decisions. It's being able to make your own mistakes. All my life I have done what you want me to do. But I want to live my life now, not just play games. The life of the aristocracy is a one big long game with lots of rules. I do not want to live by those rules anymore." "Well, you have to, because that is the way life works. I know you think I ignored you as a child, and that I did not care, but you are wrong. I loved you very much. I still love you." Here his tears choked him. "And I am so proud of you. You are all that I have left." "Stop talking about them, as if they are already dead," shouted Elizabeth. "What is wrong with you, Father? Is this what your life is? A life devoid of hope, of true meaning? And have you ever wanted to break free of it? Just throw away your job and concentrate on the things that really matter in this world. Love, people, family. Everything else is secondary." Lloyd wiped his eyes. He nodded. Elizabeth sighed. "When am I to meet him?" "At the end of the week. He is out of the town at the moment." Elizabeth nodded. "How is Joe?" she asked, changing the subject now. "He is well?" "Perhaps I will go and see him." "Very well." Elizabeth kissed his cheek gently before leaving the house. Lloyd stood in the middle of the living room, his head lowered, his mood as dark as night. 5 minutes later he walked into a tavern on the high street and ordered claret. He sat down next to the fire and brooded. He had been born into all this. He was the son of a successful silk merchant in Edinburgh. From an early age his father had instilled in him the importance of business and hard work, that work and riches were the most important thing. "Without work you are nothing, my son. You are like the beggars on the street, like all those people in the lake houses that fester in their own filth. Success is what makes you a man, William. People are judged on their successes. If you want to be admired and looked up to in this world, then make sure that your business comes before everything else." "I understand, Father." "Good boy. Now get along to school." His father had given him that little talk when he was only 7 years old, and yet he had always remembered it, and he had always believed it. He had obviously stuck very well to it, because now Elizabeth was telling him that he did not care about anything or anybody except his work. Was she right? He had not meant to be that way. He did love her. Of course he did. He loved them all. He was just extremely aware that this world was a harsh one to those without money, and he wanted to protect them all, to shelter them from that bitter climate of starvation and misery. because he knew all too well that in one fell swoop it could be all taken away, just like it happened to his father, and just like it was happening now. At the height of his success and career, just when William himself was getting started with his father had lost an entire shipment of silk reels on its way to Spain. £3,000 worth of silk on the bottom of the ocean floor. It wasn't just the money he lost, it was the trust of his foreign clients. His business had begun to deteriorate from then on, and so had his health. He had died 2 years later. Now tuberculosis was claiming the majority of his family, and somebody was trying to frame him for murder. It looked like it was all deteriorating for Lloyd as well. He sipped on his claret and thought about where it had all started. He had been educated at the Royal High School, just like his father. By the age of 14, Lloyd had an idea of what he wanted to do. His father had a lot of wine barrels in the cellar, and Lloyd had once asked him why he had so many. "I know a wine merchant in Nice, a good friend of mine. The wine is from his vineyards." "Where is Nice?" Lloyd had asked. "In France, my boy. One of the leading countries in wine production. I will take you there one day." "Really?" "Of course. It is important to travel, William. You learn about other cultures and learn different languages. There is so much to see in this world, and many countries to trade with. That is why I have so much money. It is the same with wine trade. My friend de Marlane is one of the most successful wine merchants in France." From that moment on, Lloyd knew he was destined to be a wine merchant. When he graduated from the high school, he went to Edinburgh University to study languages and trade. Once he graduated from there, he got a job in a tavern in Duddingston, a little village about 2 miles outside Edinburgh. He worked as a waiter and barman there for 4 months. His father had written to de Marlane, telling him about his son, who wanted to join the wine trade, and would there be any possibility of making a contract between them. A month after sending the letter, he received a reply, asking that he should bring his son out to Nice to meet him. The contract had been signed. When they returned to Edinburgh, Lloyd Sr. had made a deal with the auction house in Leith, whereby, when the wine came through, they would receive 10% of the stock, and the rest would go straight to his son William. Lloyd set about inventing himself after that. He bought himself smart clothes. He rented a Luckin booth on the high street and called it Lloyd Fine Wines. His first 50 crates arrived 3 weeks after he returned home. They were a mix of clarets. Business was slow at first, but he soon gained a reputation for good prices and excellent quality. Then his customers began asking about other wines, like port, and he knew he would have to start bidding at the auction house, where all wine had to pass through it when it came into Leith. He met a lot of foreign wine traders down there and struck up a relationship with a few of them. As the boats rolled in, so did the money. His business flourished over the course of 2 years, and his name became well known in the city. The newly appointed Lord Provost began purchasing claret from him. One day he sent an invitation to Lloyd to attend a dinner party he was hosting, and there he met Catherine. She was the daughter of an advocate in the city. Catherine was perfect. They had talked all evening. 5 months later they were married. A year after that they had Elizabeth. She was perfect too. Lloyd leaned forward towards the fire and stretched out his hands to warm them. How white they were, he thought. At that point, something clicked inside his mind. "White," he said, thinking out loud. "I evicted him and his family from their lake house a year ago. Is it possible that he—" His thought solidified now. Should he tell the Provost? David might not think it was worth going after. There was no harm in simply going to speak to him, was there? First he needed to find out where he was living now. The only way to do that was to look at the housemails book, which documented who lived on each close, what they earned, and how much of the king's new tax they paid. The book was kept in the Tolbooth, which doubled as the city jail. Parliament was also held there when the king was in Edinburgh. It took Lloyd a good 15 minutes sifting through the book before he found him. From there it took him 5 minutes to walk to the Cap and Feather Close, where White was now living with his family, a wife and 8 children, in a lake house. White had been a tobacco seller, selling tobacco from a lake forebooth. He had been doing well, but at the same time there was no rent coming from him. Instead, it was being frittered away on whiskey. Perhaps he had changed, thought Lloyd, as he knocked at the door. It was opened by a little boy in bare feet and grubby skin. "I wish to see your father, young sir." "He's not in." "Where is he?" "Working," came a woman's voice from inside the house. William peered into the gloom. "May I come in a moment?" he asked. "Aye," was her reluctant answer. William stepped inside. He tried to resist the urge to cover his nose. The stench was vulgar. There was no light in here, save for the tiny flicker of a cruisy lamp on the one wall. It was evidently burning animal fat, which was one cause for the putrid smell that hung thick in the atmosphere of this little room. As his eyes adjusted to the dark, he made out a cluster of children, sitting on a pile of sawdust which had been spread on the earth floor. One of them was in the process of squatting over the gaudy loo bucket in the corner. William felt like a retching. The woman sat on a low stool next to a table against the back wall. "What do you want with my husband?" she asked suspiciously. William felt the children's eyes on him. This was the family he had evicted. He would have to choose his words carefully. "I am a Bailey, madam. Your husband may be an important witness to a murder." The woman said nothing. William looked at the children again. They were all filthy. A half-eaten loaf of bread sat on the table, along with a jug of ale. Under the cruisy lamp was a small chest. "He's down at the pits. He works for Mr. Burton, the tanner. You'll find him at the bottom of Craig's Close." "Thank you, madam. I wish you good day." The tanning pits were the last place he wanted to go. If he thought that Lake House was stank, the pits would be even worse. Patrick Byrne was notorious for clearing a tavern just by walking into it. He reeked of tannic acid, which was a vile mixture of oak bark, willow bark, and horse urine. His pits were full of this liquid. When he arrived, William put a handkerchief to his nose and made his way over to the pits, where two men were working away. He recognized the tobacconist. "Mr. White," he called. The tobacconist looked around. When he saw Lloyd approaching, he dropped the hide he was carrying and came over. "Mr. Lloyd, how can I help you?" He seemed perfectly amiable, which was not what Lloyd was expecting. Then again, it could be an act. "Let's go along the shore a little way," suggested Lloyd. The two men walked until they reached the foot of Anchor Close. "Your wife said I'd find you here." White nodded. "New job?" "I'll get right to the point. I'm afraid I have to ask you where you were around 6 o'clock last night." White stared at him for a moment. "Out drinking." "Where? Which tavern?" "I wasn't in a tavern. I was in a doorway." "Still partial to whiskey, are you?" White nodded. "Sometimes," he admitted. He wiped tannic acid from his hands onto his tunic. "Why do you want to know where I was?" Lloyd explained. "Listen," said White. "I know you think we have a history, but I want you to know that what happened back then is over, as far as I'm concerned. You evicted me for a good reason. I let my family down, not you. But I'm getting better. I am. It just takes a while, that's all." William looked at him with sympathy. There was no animosity here. "So, did I kill anybody?" "No. I most certainly did not. There's too much to lose." "Like your wife and children?" William shook his head. "They're not looking good, John. I'm sorry to say it, but it's truth." "You think I don't know that?" replied White fiercely. "You think I'll look at them every night when I come home and say, 'Oh, what a happy family we are'?" He shook his head. "No, I'll look at them every night and say, 'Christ, help me.' When I wake up the next morning, I say the same thing. Help me release them from this slime and muck. I come in, I'm stinking of tannic acid, my children are hungry, my wife's crying, telling me she can't cope." He brushed his stained fingers through his hair and exhaled. "I know it damn well, Mr. Lloyd. I used to ask my wife, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be? Because it's certainly not Edinburgh, that's for sure." William closed his eyes. "I'm sorry. It wasn't my place to say." He sighed. "Times are tough at the moment." "That's an understatement. I have a responsibility towards my family. I brought these children into this world, all 8 of them. I have to give them a life now. I messed up once. I'm not planning on doing it a second time." William was pensive a while. He suddenly reached into his pouch and removed a fat bag of money. He'd been going to purchase a number of other lake houses as an investment, and then the children had become ill. He handed the bag now to White. Take this. What? It's £500. Take it for your family. Get them out of that slime and muck. Look after them properly, and get the hell out of the city. White was staring at him. Is this a joke? He asked. No, Mr. White, it's not a joke. William, this is 10 years' wages in here. You can't be serious. Lloyd pushed the bag harder into White's hand. Go. Go back to your wife. Get her and the children out of here, before it's too late. Tears appeared in White's eyes. Why are you doing this? He asked. Because for my family it is too late. In the deep shadows of Anchor Close, a figure stood motionless, watching and listening to the two men converse. When he saw the exchange of money, a strange little smile stole across his face in the darkness. Oh, William, he muttered to himself. Naughty boy. Samuel Marshall was stoking the fire in his meagre living quarters when the floor behind him creaked as if somebody had just moved on it. He spun round on his haunches, brandishing the poker. The barrel of a pistol was pointing at him out from the gloom, its shiny surface reflecting the firelight. Samuel stared down it. Who are you? What do you want? A favour, said the voice. Samuel squinted. Show yourself, coward! The response was the cocking of the pistol. I'm no coward, and I'll blow the head off any man who says otherwise. I'm surprised you don't recognise my voice. Has it really been that long, Marshal? A face emerged from the darkness. My God, said Marshall. I've come to collect my debt. Your debt? Yes, Marshal, my debt. You owe me, remember? Marshall was still brandishing the poker. What's the matter, Marshall? You think I'd really shoot you? I saved your life, after all. Marshall lowered the poker. Yes, you did. Henderson sat himself down on a chair. So what's this favour you need? A very important one. He told him about Lloyd and the murder. And, asked Marshall nervously, you're going to hand yourself over to the authorities and tell them you were involved? Are you out of your mind? Not in the least. What you're going to tell them is this. Lloyd hired you and another rogue to kill his apprentice because he was stealing from Lloyd. This other man's name is White. Earlier today, Lloyd paid White £500 and told him to leave the city. You're going to say that that was payment for the murder. You're going to turn King's evidence in return for your life because you've had a change of heart, because you're sorry for what you've done. Henderson leaned forward in his chair. If you do all this, it is I who will be in debt to you, my friend. After leaving Marshall's lodgings, Henderson went in search of Campbell. He found him in the lawn market amongst all the hustle and bustle of traders. What do you want? Asked Campbell. Henderson put his mouth right up to Campbell's ear. I have some information about Lloyd. It may be of no importance, but I happened to be on Anchor Close when I saw him talking with a man on the loch shore. I couldn't hear properly, but everything, but what I caught words were murder and money. He then handed him a huge bag of coins. He seemed to be telling him to get out of the city. Campbell had frozen. Good work, Henderson. I don't suppose you called the name of this other man? White. John White. Thank you. I'll consider this new information you've given me. As Henderson disappeared through the crowd of people, Campbell felt the surge of adrenaline. Was it possible? Lloyd, a man from the same ranks as himself, committing murder? How could that be? And he suddenly found himself struggling with that notion, and struggling too with his own feelings towards Lloyd. He didn't like the man, but did he really want to believe that he could kill somebody? If Lloyd could kill, that meant that Campbell could as well. And that was a notion he did not want to consider for a minute. Gentlemen did not kill people. Rubbish. A gentleman could kill someone just as easily as the callous criminal does, just as the lords had killed Rizzio less than 100 years ago. Who would have believed that? High society were just as likely to commit murder as anyone else. So which rank had his brother's murderers come from? Had he been murdered by his own kind? Is that why they had never found the killer? Because they were looking in the wrong place, in the wrong circles. Campbell left the throng around the Lawnmarket and headed out towards the kirkyard of Greyfriars, where his brother's remains had been interred. His grave was at the far west end of the kirkyard, a lavish headstone marking the spot. Campbell stopped before it now, standing in the silence for a moment. He was recalling their last meeting together. "I know you're ashamed of me, Aaron. You have every right to be. I was more influenced by our father than you were. We managed to break away from the corruption that still holds me in its grasp." He sighed. "I know what you want of me. I just don't know that I can do it. I will always love you, Aaron. I will always look up to you, and remember the brother that you were to me. Please forgive me for my sins." He read the epitaph on the headstone before turning away. The Provost's manservant opened the door to Campbell's knock and showed him inside. Once he was alone with the Provost, he proceeded to relay to him the information he had received from Henderson. The Provost was pale. He did not speak for a few minutes. "This, informant of yours, just how reliable is he?" "Very reliable." Campbell cleared his throat. "Listen, despite our past history, I have my doubts too. But if what my informant tells me is true, then I have to investigate." The Provost nodded. "Of course." Again there was a silence. The Provost was thinking about Catherine and his godchildren, lying in those beds. Despair began to well up inside him. "Let me talk to him before you do. Let me see if there's another explanation to this." "All right," replied Campbell. Chapter 8. White flung wide his door and marched into his house. He picked up his youngest son and planted a kiss on his cheek. Then he took hold of his wife and began waltzing round the room with her. "What's put you in such a good mood all of a sudden?" she asked, grinning at him. "Somebody came to see me today." "Aye, somebody came here too, looking for you. What's happened?" He pulled her closer. "My dear, sweet Agnes," he said, "if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?" "Not here, for a start. What is all this?" "My darling, we don't have to live in this muck any longer. We can live in that beautiful house in Holland, the one you're always dreaming about." He put the pouch of money in her hand. For a moment she stared at it. Then she ran to the chest under the lamp and poured the money out onto its surface. Her eyes widened. "How much?" she asked. "That, my dear Agnes, is £500. The woman screamed. She flung herself onto her husband, crying and kissing him alternately. "We're going to be okay now," he said. She held onto him for a few seconds longer, before running over to the children on the floor and almost scooping them up, kissing each one of them in turn. "We're rich, my little bairns. No more sleeping in the sawdust." She looked back at her husband, grinning broadly at him, the tears of joy running down her face. Lloyd was in the Bailey's room in the toll booth at 7 o'clock that evening, when 3 members of the town guard walked in. "William Lloyd?" "Yes," he replied. "The Lord Provost requests your presence immediately. Will you come with us?" 10 minutes later he was being ushered into the Provost's chambers. William knew at once something was wrong. His friend was not smiling. "What's wrong, David?" "What can you tell me about White?" "I beg your pardon?" "You may be doing that in a minute. Have you been talking to this man about this murder?" "Listen, before you—" "I told you not to chase shadows, goddammit!" shouted the Provost. Lloyd hung his head as David explained. "Who is he then? Why do you think he has something to do with Ashcroft's murder? But more importantly, why the hell did you pay him a large amount of money? How much was it?" £500. The Provost stared at him. "Have you lost your mind?" Lloyd filled him in on the background details. "Why did you not come to me? I didn't think it was necessary. He might not have had anything to do with it. As it turns out, I was right. How can you be so sure?" "I'm sure, okay?" The Provost sighed heavily. "Do you want to explain all this to Campbell, or should I? Because somebody has to explain it to him." "I'd rather leave that up to you." The Provost turned his back on him. "Go home, William. Go home and stay home. Leave this case to Campbell." Lloyd trudged back up the high street to his home. Once inside he wandered through to the living room, opened the large window and stared down into the close below. It was dark now. The Bowert lamps flickered away. He could hear a baby crying, and he thought of Euphemie, his own infant. The baby's pathetic wails echoed up and down the close. It was soon joined by the mother's frantic tones. "Somebody help us! My bairn is dying! My bairn is dying! So is mine, muttered Lloyd. He turned away from the window now and slumped onto the floor. He felt the helplessness of the situation. As he sat in a depressed silence, he suddenly remembered the letter he had slipped into his pocket earlier on. He now retrieved it and opened the envelope. Inside was a small slip of paper. The writing on it looked like it had been scribbled quickly by a frantic hand. As he read, his blood ran cold.
You bastard, William. We could have been happy together. We could have lived in peace. But you left me behind. You chose your career over me. You left me in the hands of that so-called man of God. Something I will never forgive you for, as long as I live.
Lloyd let the piece of paper slip from his fingers. Who had written this? He could not think. He read it again, slowly, and again and again. Each time he felt the same chill. The words were like poison to his soul. And then, as he began to read it over for the 5th time, it suddenly began to come back to him. Something from his past came to the forefront of his mind. Annie. She was the daughter of the landlord of the Sheepshead Inn in Duddingston, the tavern where he had worked as a young man just after graduating from university. She had professed to love him, but William was not there for love. He was there to gain experience. Dabbling with a woman's affections was the last thing he wanted. Besides, she was already betrothed to the parish minister, thanks to her father, who had offered a large dowry. Annie did not love him, did not want anything to do with him, and was desperately unhappy at the prospect of marrying him. Her father had told her he was the perfect suitor. How could she go wrong? He was a man of God.
I don't love him, William. I love you.
Lloyd had just retired for the night. He was in his attic room under the eaves of the old building. If your father catches you up here...
Do you not hear me? Do you not want to hear me?
No, I hear you, Annie, but it is not my place to interfere, certainly not in this affair. Now, I suggest you leave. She put her back against the door.
I can't. I need an answer from you.
What answer are you looking for? That I love you? Well, I don't. She shook her head slowly.
I don't believe you. I've seen the way you look at me.
She moved close to him.
You can't pretend to me that there isn't anything there.
He didn't look at her now. Suddenly she took his hand and placed it on her breast. What are you doing?
Touch me. I want you to touch me. I want you to feel that there is something there. An attraction, a lust.
He removed his hand from her grasp. There's nothing more to say. He turned away from her.
It isn't fair, she said after a minute. Why can't I marry whom I choose? I thought marriage was for love. Obviously I was wrong.
You might come to love him, Annie.
We have nothing in common.
Your religion.
That is
enough. Now, I came here to work. I did not come here to fall in love. I am sorry if I have led you to believe that. I certainly had no intention of doing so. Lloyd stared at the letter again. After all these years, she was still angry with him. Clearly, she had not come to love the minister. The so-called man of God? That did not sound good. When the letter from Dunmarlane finally arrived, asking to meet him, he had packed his bags and left. But not before she had begged Lloyd to take her home with him. It had been an ugly scene. Her brother had also tried to get him to relent. He said his sister was in danger, that the minister was rumoured to be a brutal man. Lloyd had mounted the carriage without a word, and never looked back. What else could he do? Annie McGrath and her brother Duncan. Could they have plotted this between them? As Lloyd was pondering the possibilities, several closes away the Lord Provost was pondering whether to retire for the night, when his servant came to him with a message. Campbell requests your presence at the toll booth immediately, sir. There's been a development in the case. The Provost sighed. Very well, have my carriage prepared. 10 minutes later he was walking into the grim, dark building, where he was met by Campbell. What's going on? He asked. I will explain, sir. Please come with me. Campbell led him into a room where the jailer was guarding a solitary man sitting at a small table and shaking from head to foot. In one corner of the room was Joe, standing sullenly with his arms folded. Your Lordship, began Campbell as he closed the door. This is Samuel Marshall. You need to hear what he has to say. And what is that? Asked the Provost, turning to him. He listened quietly as Marshall relayed his story. By the time he was finished, the Provost had his head in his hands. Eventually he looked up. I suppose you want to make a deal, don't you? Spare my life, and I'll testify to all of this. The Provost grunted. How do we know you're not lying? Said Joe, coming out of his corner. Lloyd is clearly being framed. How do we know you're not working for the same person? Do you think I'd be stupid enough to show my face here just to frame someone? I don't know, said Joe, leaning forward across the table. Maybe you would. That's enough, Joe, said Campbell. He addressed Marshall. Do you swear that what you've told us today is the truth? I swear it, sir. Campbell sighed. Very well. Take him to cell 4. The jailer escorted Marshall from the room. The Provost remained seated. Campbell was silent for a few minutes. Joe put his hands on his head and kicked the wall in frustration. He turned. This is wrong. Something's wrong here. This is not the man we know and love. The Provost didn't look at him. Given that his matches up to exactly what my informant told me, I have to conclude that this gentleman is speaking the truth. Joe shook his head. Can you not see? This is part of the plan. You're saying that my informant is involved in this. Is that correct, Joe? Well, I wouldn't put it past him. Oh, and why is that? Because you think I'm corrupt? I don't think you're corrupt. I know... Joe, please, said the Provost. Campbell is right, as much as I am loath to believe it. He closed his eyes. Once again he saw his godchildren. I will issue arrest warrants for Lloyd and White immediately. Campbell nodded. I'm sorry, Joe, he said, and left the room. Joe stared at the Provost. Did I just hear correctly? What in God's name are you... The Provost stood up swiftly. Joseph, he said sternly, you forget yourself. I am Lord Provost. Whatever your feelings on this, you will maintain professionalism at all times. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. He headed for the door. Before opening it, he turned back. Now find Lloyd and get him the hell out of here. White and his wife were playing games with the children when the town guard burst through the door. The little one screamed. 2 guards approached White and hauled him to his feet. John Anderson White, said Campbell, I'm arresting you for murder. No, she screamed Agnes. Find the money, said Campbell. Agnes tried to claw her husband back from the strong grip of the guards as they dragged him out to a waiting carriage. Leave him alone, she begged. The bag of money was found in the chest. Please don't take it. It's for my bairns. It's blood money, madam, said Campbell. She tried to snatch the bag off him. Campbell struggled with her, and she ended up falling. He headed swiftly for the door, but she scrambled after him on all fours and clung onto his leg. Please, she begged again. She was suddenly kicked in the face by a guard. She yelped in pain and retreated hastily, shielding herself from any more physical harm. What the hell did you do that for? Yelled Campbell, pushing the guard out the door. As it slammed, Agnes broke down in tears, desperate, frightened and confused tears. Most of the children were crying too. Where have they taken father? Sobbed one of them. Who are those men? Asked another. Agnes could answer neither of them. William was suddenly aware of arms shaking him violently. Someone was yelling. He opened his eyes. Joe was standing over him. William, get up. You've got to go now. What are you talking about? The Provost has issued a warrant for your arrest. You've got 5 minutes before the town guard arrive. William leapt to his feet. Where is there to go? No idea. We're being stay here. He followed Joe down the stairs and out onto the high street, then dived into Mary King's Close. It was dark now. No natural light above them. They splashed hastily through the Gardyloo muck, some of it splashing up under their clothes. They hardly noticed. Joe was leading them down to the Nor Loch. We can get a boat across, he said. We need to get out of the city. When they reached the loch side, they found a couple of small rowing boats upside down, their bottoms encrusted with dry, raw sewage. They righted one of them and pushed it into the water. The oars were lying next to it. They climbed in, Joe rowing and Lloyd sitting in the bow.